Hey, what's going on, everybody? Island Card Collector here, coming to you today with a very special video. This is something that I've been working on for a little bit of time as I went down a pretty deep rabbit hole, I must admit, scanning old newspaper articles, looking at blog posts from the early 2000s, and what I was looking for was a really good view and understanding of the Topps baseball card print runs by year, every year through the history of Topps from 1952, starting with 1952, going through 2025. Part of the reason for making this video right now is that Topps Series 1 flagship just released, and the hobby is noticing that the print runs are up to nearly 2021. We'll call them 21-22 COVID pandemic levels. In Topps Series 1 baseball in 2025, over 1 million base cards exist for each player, which is, to a lot of people in the hobby and in the industry, alarming numbers. There is some criticism of fanatics saying that they're going to print Topps into a junk wax era 2.0. Some out there would say that we are already in a junk wax 2.0 era. Is that true? Well, rather than just to kind of sit back on the side and just speculate, I wanted to dive in, do my own research, because I feel like there are a lot of great videos and great content out there. There's some good forums, baseball forums that have covered this a little bit. You know, I'll shout out to Scotty B Cards. Scotty B has done a really good job over the last few years in coming up with print runs from pack odds. Junk Wax Hero actually did a great video on this topic about 1 year ago. But I did spend significant time doing this and putting together this review for you today in this video, and I hope that you all find it as interesting as I did. Let's get into it. All right, here we go. I'm excited to present this video to you. If you like it and you find it enjoyable, smash that like button. I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, I've got an asterisk on here. We are going to review Topps baseball card print runs by year 1952 through 2025. The disclaimer is this is unofficial. These are estimates only. There are some educated guesses along the way. Fanatics, please don't sue me. And commenters, please be nice to me in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. All right, a few notes as we get started here. Every effort was made to pull in estimated print runs from reliable sources, but a few educated guesses had to be made as well. That's a little bit more of the disclaimer. 1951 Topps was not considered since it is a game and not a traditional baseball card set with stats on the back. My apologies to 1951 Topps fans. An important note here is that scarcity amongst series was not calculated. For example, some older vintage sets have up to 7 series of cards of packs that they came out with during the year. The later ones are referred to as high numbered cards. They're very short printed in many cases. This guide should not be used to accurately show the number of cards for a particular player. For example, Mickey Mantle in 1952 Topps was a high number card, Series 7 card. Much more rare than a Series 1 card of 1952 of a different player. The purpose of this is to give a ballpark estimate by year of how many cards exist, just to average it out. In general, Topps makes the same number of base cards for every single player. There are exceptions where they've been known to double print a card, but it is their intention, and has been from the beginning, to produce an even number of cards for every single base card, every single player. Note also that this applies even in later years, as Series 2 is always printed less than Series 1. But I've normalized those numbers across both sets. A player in Series 1 will have slightly more cards than the yearly average, while a player in Series 2 will be slightly less. And just to throw out some numbers from a recent year, and these are ballpark numbers, 2021 had about 1 million base cards of Series 1 and about 600,000 of Series 2. So in the formula that I've put together, you're going to see about 800,000 across the board for the year. Again, we're looking at yearly totals and trying to identify trends as we go into this. So, as I went into this research, I did a lot of searching through old newspaper articles, and I found some interesting ones. I had heard a little bit of the story about some cars being thrown into the ocean in late 1952. I did find this news article from the Star News, July 31st, 1989, that actually goes into it in more detail than I was aware of. So I wanted to kind of share that here with you. The bubblegum wars had kicked off into high gear in 1952 as Topps produced their first large format set in direct competition with Bowman, who had already produced wildly popular sets in the late 40s and in 1950 and 1951. However, Topps overestimated how popular their cards would be, and when they had released Series 7, they also had football cards that had come out, and kids were spending their pennies and nickels on football cards and other things, and had turned their attention from baseball. This left Topps with a big problem. They had a director of baseball at the time, Cyberger, and they went to Cy and said, hey, we got too many of these cards. He was supposed to take them to an incinerator, but he was unable to make arrangements with the incinerator company, and so he just grabbed two big trucks, a couple guys, and had them driven onto a barge and dumped in the ocean off the East Coast, off of New Jersey. And this is the newspaper article that talks about it. Cyberger was on one of the trucks and went onto the barge and said that he was gobbling seasick pills. So you can imagine this barge out in the ocean. There's rough waves, there's high seas, old Cyberger getting sick to his stomach, and the boxes of cards with thousands of Mickey Mantle rookies, Jackie Robinsons, Pee Wee Reeses, Hoyt Wilhelms, Roy Campanellas, all faced a watery grave that day. Nobody really knows how many Mickey Mantle cards survived. I did find an article in 1988 where Dr. James Beckett speculated that perhaps 50,000 Mickey Mantle rookies were sold, and that today 5,000 or less exist. So I wasn't clear from my research whether Dr. Beckett thought that the 50,000 included the cards that went to the ocean or did not. And when you look at PSA and SGC combined, they've graded about 2,308 copies as of time of this filming. So I think it is probably in that ballpark, 4,000, 5,000 of the 1952 iconic Topps Mickey Mantle were made. We get our first clue to production numbers from a 1960 newspaper article. And you can see the article here, Sun Telegraph, May 8th, 1960. And you can see Stan Musial presumably signing a card for a young boy there. And you can see down below in the caption for this photo that Topps Chewing Gum Company will issue approximately 600 different cards this season, and it is estimated that over 250 million of them will be sold in bubblegum packages. So there you go. 250 million 1960 Topps baseball cards. The hobby of baseball card collecting, it became more and more popular during the 1960s. In fact, in 1962, the Federal Trade Commission filed a lawsuit against Topps, accusing them of having a monopoly on photographs of star players. The lawsuit was in court for over 3 years. It was finally dismissed in May of 1965. And remember, the lawsuit was not that there was a monopoly on baseball cards or sports cards, but it was on photographs of stars. And the judge ruled that Topps only had 39% of the market of sports star photographs. So the case was dismissed, although in reality, Topps was basically a monopoly at that point in time because they had bought out Bowman. Bowman was an early competitor through 1955, and then Topps had acquired the assets of Bowman and effectively shut them down. As we look at the growing popularity and we look at the production numbers by year, hobby veterans have commented online that they believe the cards became a little bit more plentiful in 1968, and production was increasing in the late 60s as we headed into the 1970s. All right, this is really big. The Federal Trade Commission case, the documents were released for that lawsuit. And in those documents, Topps was forced to release sales data for the first time. And you can see this is a graph from that release. But we're going to take this information and we're going to put it to work for us as we try to fill out our graphs for Topps print runs. How do we do that? We take the clue from 1960 that there were 250 million cards sold with gum, and we can use 1960 as a baseline and get year-by-year numbers by extrapolating across the other years. So you can see here, I've got highlighted in the light green the year 1960, 250 million cards sold with gum. We're going to go ahead and add on another 293,000 cards sold without gum. Those are going to be valued at 1 cent each. It's close enough. Maybe that's slightly off, but we're going with that based on the research that has been conducted here. That's a 100%. That comes up to 252 million cards. And so we can see, going back before that in the year 1952, using this math based on their sales revenue, there were only about 59 million cards in total made for the year. And you can see clearly in 1956, there's a spike. We'll get into that, into why that was. But this gives us a pretty good idea into how many cards Topps was printing back in the 1950s. Other clues start to emerge over the years as we dive into different newspaper articles. For example, in an Evening Independent article from May of 1970, Cy Berger is quoted saying Topps makes over 250 million baseball cards per year. The 250 million figure is also cited in a newspaper article from June of 1974. Then in a book from 1975, Cy Berger mentions that Topps aims to print 375,000 cards of each player every year. We get into the 1980s, and Beckett Baseball Card Price Guide number 3 came out and estimated a print run of 250 to 500,000 cards per player for the early to mid 70s, with an slight increase starting in 1977. Then, in 1983, a Sports Collector's Digest magazine article stated that 750,000 cards are made by Topps of each player every year. You can see that there is definitely an increase in printing as we go into the 1980s. Then we get to the mid-1980s, and we need to talk about the junk wax era. Baseball and sports card collecting in general exploded in popularity in the 1980s and the early 1990s. This era is commonly referred to as the junk wax era. But what years are the junk wax era anyway? Well, there are conflicting dates thrown out all the time, and in this video, we're going to answer that question. Additionally, if you scour, as I have, baseball card forums, blogs, you watch other YouTube videos on this topic, I've seen estimates go as high as 8 million, 10 million, 12 million cards printed of each player. I saw one where a guy said that they made 20 million cards of each player. All sorts of numbers being thrown out there without really any basis in fact. There was mass production. Nobody is disputing that. However, my research shows that those numbers are way overstated. Let's dive in. So how many cards exactly were they printing in the junk wax era? In a 1987 newspaper article that quotes Cy Berger, it states that Topps prints over 500 million cards annually. So we are seeing a significant increase. It also stated there were an estimated 10 million baseball card collecting hobbyists. I wonder how many there are today. It feels like 10 million is maybe about the same. What do you think? All right. 1988, there's a Bend, Oregon newspaper, the Bend Bulletin, that came out with an article, and they were just doing some speculation, I think. There's no real basis in fact here, but they thought that in the year 1988 they were going to produce over 5 million Don Mattingly cards across the 4 major brands. So that's not Topps exclusively, but that's another interesting little nugget as we try to compile our charts and graphs. Up, up, and away. So it definitely was a massive boom. A 1989 article about the hobby soaring to new heights and beyond the horizon says that over 5 billion cards will be made that year. It's quite a few. A 1991 article from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette talked about baseball cards that were being shipped to troops overseas in Kuwait and in the Persian Gulf in Operation Desert Shield. This article actually offers the best clue about the true peak production. 6,300 of each Desert Shield card were made, about 1,000 times less than the estimated 6 million of each regular Topps card. So there you go, 1991, 6 million of each card. They were printing to the moon for sure. They definitely were overprinting. But I don't think it was 20 million. I don't think it was 12 million. I kind of think 6 million is near the peak. So when did the junk wax era end? It went from boom to bust. Do you know at the peak of the hype, 1989, 1990, people were actually mortgaging their homes to buy baseball cards. It was crazy. And for those like me that were alive during that time period, you guys remember this. It was nuts, guys. There were baseball cards everywhere. They were in bags of dog food. Basically everywhere, every product. Duracell batteries you could get baseball cards with. They were at every single gas station. They were printed to the moon and back for sure. And it was massive hype. Massive, massive hype. And that's when I, like many of you, got into the hobby for the first time. We rode that hype train. Now check this out. I thought to myself, remembering back unto my youth, that the baseball strike of 1994 is what killed the hobby. However, take a look at this from the Prescott Courier, February 9th, 1993. Here's an article that says the sports card market may be topping out. Very interesting. Topps announced that they expected a loss their first quarter in the red since 1982. There was a lot of competition on the scene, but the bubble was starting to burst. Now, the strike definitely was the final nail in the coffin. However, the junk wax era bubble, as you can see from this article, was already bursting in 1993. So we get into the late 1990s. Here's an article, I thought the title was kind of funny, from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, February 1995. The hot baseball card for 1995. Don't laugh, but it may be Topps. It talks about Topps is deciding to raise the price of a pack from 50 cents to $1.29, and they are producing the least amount of cards that they have made per player in any year since 1965. So they're trying to show the fan base, the hobby base, if you will, hey guys, these cards, we're not printing them anymore like we did a few years ago. They're going to be, chased after. There's going to be some scarcity that's introduced into the equation, but obviously also to control costs and try to return to profitability. As the hobby struggled, and this is so important, right? We had to have that boom bust cycle for one reason. It drove innovation. As the hobby struggled for relevance, there were some brands that were going out of business. There were some bankruptcy filings. The brands that were still hanging on, they had to innovate or die. They came out with autograph cards and packs. They came out with serial numbered cards. They came out with chromium and shiny refractor technology cards. They started doing die cutting of cards. They started putting game used memorabilia, bats and jersey patches into cards. All of the innovation that really still exists today, almost all of the innovation occurred because the junk wax bubble burst. So I think that's very interesting and important to note as you look back through history and as we look at the production numbers. Now, about 25 years ago, actually 2001 Topps Gold came out, so that probably was the first year. 2000 may have had some odds on the packs, but pack odds for inserts, for serial numbered inserts, has made it relatively easy to calculate the print run in a given year. Now, these calculations do not include complete sets or non-hit packs that are sold in dollar stores, which I've noticed is a recent phenomenon. I don't know exactly what year they started throwing the little 5-card non-hit packs in the dollar stores, but I noticed it during the pandemic. I don't recall it really being before there. But anyway, obviously that adds to the print run numbers. All right, guys, are you ready? Are you excited? Let's go to the charts. Here you go, the decade of the 1950s, the number of Topps baseball cards printed by year, and you can see a spike up of about 40% increase from 1955 to 1956. Why is that? It's simple. In early 1956, Topps completed their acquisition of Bowman. And Bowman ceased to exist, and that created an opportunity for Topps to print more cards and to make more money. So you can see as we get through the 1950s, more and more cards are being printed each year. When we go through the 1960s, the 1970s, up until right near the end of the 1970s, I think, again, an educated guess based on research, there wasn't a big deviation until you got into the late 70s. So you're gonna see that on an upcoming chart, but I think those years were fairly flat. Again, remember the numbers: 250 million per year, 375,000 cards of each player. Seiberger was quoted using those statistics over a number of different years, from 1960 up into the 70s. So we're kind of going to run with pretty flat numbers across that time period. So let's look at this. This is the junk wax bubble visualized. You can see in the early 1980s, as we got into 1986, production started to really ramp up. 1987, and then 1988, 89, 90, 91. Those are really the peak years of the junk wax. 92 coming down, and then all the way down to 1995, the lowest amount of cards made since some of those early 1950s sets. Okay, so now let's take a look at the last 25 years of production, and you can see a very clear increase in the number of cards being printed from the pandemic years, 2021 and on. Again, there was a slight dip in 2024, which we were all thankful for and hopeful for. Bad news in 2025, they're printing to the moon again, but not quite as, not even close, honestly, to what they were doing during the junk wax era. Let's look at the big chart, guys. This one is for all the money. All the research goes into this one pretty graph. The number of Topps baseball cards printed per player by year and you're going to see that junk wax spike. Crazy, crazy, right, guys? And then you're going to see some decent production numbers here over the last few years. All right. Very, very interesting. I wanted to share some final thoughts with you as we wrap this video. First off, I thought that 1950s cards were more rare. I think they actually printed more than I expected. However, many of those cards were lost to time. You hear people talk about the cards my mom threw out. My dad talks about how his mom, my grandma, took garbage bags full of cards when she was on a cleaning kick in her house and just threw them all out to the trash. And the trash man took them away before they could notice that their prized possessions were lost to history. And that's a common story. You hear it all the time. Many of these cards were lost or discarded. And why? Because baseball cards were not considered collectible quite yet. Another final thought is that the junk wax era was a relatively short-lived bubble, spanning from 1987 to 1992. And we're going to throw in 1986 and 93 and call those kind of the shoulder years. But really, it was 87 to 92 that was the true peak of the junk wax era. Baseball as a sport and baseball cards reached a low in popularity in the mid-1990s. And as I reflected back, this made a lot of sense to me because 1995 was the last year that I remember buying packs of baseball cards. I actually got out of the hobby for about 5 years. I didn't buy any other new packs actually until 2000 and then 2001. So 1996 tops, 97, 98, 99, even 2000 tops. I don't think I opened any of that product when it came out. So apparently, unbeknownst to me, I lost interest in it at about the same time that pretty much everybody else did. So that leads me into saying that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But there was a lot on the line if you think about it. Baseball was not very popular. Soccer was increasing in popularity. All these other sports were increasing in popularity. And baseball was fighting for relevance. The strike, there are people to this day that never went back to baseball after the strike of 1994. They were just burnt out by millionaires fighting with billionaires. And I get it. I truly get it. But we think back about one glorious summer, the summer of 1998, the home run chase. Could somebody break Roger Maris's record of 61 home runs in a season? You had Mark McGwire, you had Sammy Sosa, you had King Griffey Jr., and they captivated the attention of the country. But here's a question. Did the league juice those balls out of desperation in a fight to maintain relevance and to get their fans back? I know that the home run chase brought a lot of people back to baseball, and that's just simply a fact. Interesting. I'm not going to go out there and say for sure, but it is quite coincidental that at the low, baseball and the hobby of baseball card collecting was resurrected after the 1998 season. Here's another one. Popular narrative today is that we are in Junk Wax 2.0. I'm going to declare we are not in a Junk Wax 2.0 era. If you think about 6 million cards being made of a player in a season, and now we're at maybe a million, approaching a million. However, that being said, fanatics must proceed with caution. You do not want to overprint, and they are at risk of that. I know they want to 10x the hobby, and that's going to require some additional printing, but they need to make sure that supply does not get ahead of demand, as what occurred in the Junk Wax 1.0 era. All right, guys. I hope you've really enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I have put my numbers into a Google Sheet that is publicly available for viewing. I'm going to link it in the description of this video as well. And I hope that you can all take a look at that and you can find it to be very interesting. I put the FTC numbers from the 1950s into the early 60s onto a second tab, so be sure to take a look at that as well. Double check my math and my logic there. I welcome comments on this video because, again, we're all hobbyists, right? We're all collectors, and we're all just trying to understand because Topps doesn't give us this information. Topps, what are you doing? How many cards are you making in a given year? How rare and valuable are my key rookie cards? But again, I hope you really enjoyed this video and you can take some value and benefit from it. And thanks for watching.